welcome to another historical fiction author chat. Today I welcome all the way from Switzerland, Caroline Bishop. Hello, Caroline.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us today. Caroline is actually half Canadian. She sounds like a Brit. She's sort of British Canadian, but living in Switzerland. She's got it all going on here. And we are talking about her new book, The Lost Chapter, which I did read and I did love, and I'll just show you in case you haven't noticed it enough. This one, sorry about my video, but it was a beautiful book. And so I'm looking forward to chatting with you about it, Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I will read Caroline's bio and the synopsis of the book as usual, and then I will disappear into the tiny little square where you guys can't see me. And Caroline will read to us from the prologue in the beginning of the book, and you're gonna enjoy this, I think. All right. So Caroline Bishop was the assistant editor of International Arts Manager magazine before becoming an editor at the Society of London Theatre, where she spent 6 years reviewing West End shows, interviewing actors and directors, and learning where to stand at the after-show party in order to get first dibs on the canapes. In 2012, she turned freelance and veered her writing towards travel and food, taking on commissions for titles including The Guardian, The Independent, The Telegraph, France Magazine, Adventure Travel, Living France, and BBC Travel. The Lost Chapter is her Canadian debut. A British Canadian, she currently lives in Switzerland. You've done everything. That's so fantastic. So the synopsis of The Lost Chapter. At 80 years old, Florence Carter is content with her life. A widow in her twilight years, she spends her days making intricate lino prints in the company of her dog and cat, and her neighborhood's daughter Alice, a shy young woman troubled by a recent trauma. But when Flo learns that a long-lost friend has written a novel based on their time at finishing school, she's forced to confront a secret from her past. And then we go back to France, 1957. In post-war Lyon, Florence and Lilli meet at a strict finishing school for girls. Florence, or Flo as she's known, is a demure young Englishwoman who is expected to enter society and make a good marriage. Lilli, meanwhile, is a brash American with an independent spirit and a thirst for adventure. Despite their differences, they forge a firm friendship that promises to last a lifetime until terrible betrayal tears them apart. Now, as Flo reads Lilli's book, she struggles to separate fact from fiction. Desperate for answers, she decides to take a road trip to France to find Lilli, and she invites Alice and her mother Carla to join her in hopes the change of scenery will lift their spirits. But when they reach Lyon, it's Flo who needs help, as the buried truth from long ago threatens to overwhelm her. The Lost Chapter is a poignant novel about the power of friendship and a beautiful reminder that it's never too late to start writing a different story. I really love this. It gave me chills. So now everybody sit back with your tea or coffee and whatever else, and your biscuit, of course. When we have British writers on, we say biscuit. Normally it's cookies or donuts, but so I will now disappear into the blue here, and I turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to read the prologue and the first section. Prologue, Lyon, France, April 1958. The question I suppose you might ask me when you get to the end of this story is whether I would have changed anything had I known how it was going to turn out. And the answer is absolutely not. Of course, there are myriad ways in which my life could have turned out differently, many dependent on the actions of other people. But regarding my own actions, the only ones I, Eleanor Lenny Cranshaw, could control after all, I can tell you right now that I wouldn't have changed a damn thing. But back then, on that chilly spring night in April 1958, loitering on a street corner in the dark, looking at my watch every 10 seconds as I waited for Fran, I felt less confident than my actions in the previous months had hitherto implied. What the hell had I done? How had my year in school in France, which had started with such giddy excitement, ended in this remarkably abrupt and unexpected manner? I looked down at my shoes, black leather Oxfords, a little dirty, and hysteria bubbled up in my chest to think of our esteemed headmistress, Madame Bouchard, catching me standing on the street in the dark like a lady of the evening, all her judgments about me confirmed. You've demeaned yourself, Eleanor, wasted all that potential. I tried to breathe evenly to quell the laughter, White wisps appeared and then dissolved on the cold night air. But it wasn't funny, the situation I found myself in. In fact, though I hadn't ever said it aloud, it was actually a little daunting. That certainly wasn't a word I'd used with Fran when the two of us had discussed our plan late at night, talking in whispers in our bedroom at the school. Daunting? Hardly. It's going to be wonderful, honey, I'd said. I'm going to make it wonderful, I promise. I was the confident one, the persuader, cajoling her with my boundless enthusiasm. I had to be, since she wasn't. I had to tell her that we'd conquer this new life we were embarking on, Fran and I. Fleeing the school would be liberating and possibly quite thrilling. We could do this because we'd have each other. Together, we'd make it work. I convinced myself in the end, I really had. All these years later, I am still good at convincing myself to do things I possibly shouldn't. And I thought I'd convinced her too. I looked at my watch again. It was nearly 11:10. Come on, Fran. There was only so long I could hang around before the lights would come on in the chateau, the alarm would be raised, and Bouchard would send out a search party in an attempt to drag me back. And that simply could not happen. I was finished with that place, with its rules and conventions and double standards and constraints. And it was finished with me too, though not in the way it had intended, and I still derived considerable satisfaction from that. I understood in that moment that I was going to do this regardless. Yes, I needed Fran. Without her, how would I possibly manage? And more importantly, I wanted Fran, because I'd miss her so desperately if she wasn't with me. However, she'd been right about something. I was brave, or perhaps foolhardy, as Ma would have said, and I was going to deal with the consequences of my actions in my own way, whatever happens. I looked up at the clouds drifting across the moon. When the lunar glow shone down on me again, I'd go. I'd walk to the bus stop and head into Lyon city centre. I'd follow through with the plan, our plan, because I had to, because the alternative was unacceptable to me. And if she failed to show up, I'd leave her behind. That was her choice to make, just as this was mine. I nodded to myself, decision made, that's that, and swallowed down a lump in my throat. A few moments later, the clouds parted and the road lit up, the moonlight so bright I could see my shadow on the pavement, the shadow of an 18-year-old woman wearing a woolen dress, coat and hat, a small suitcase at her feet. It's a silhouette I remember still. It's seared into my head, because it was the end of the first phase of my life and the start of a new one that would mold me into a person I am now. And I like that person. I'm proud of her. I glanced up at the school building, this strange mock castle that had been my home and my prison for the previous 7 months, picked up my case and turned up the road. Something shattered inside me, but I didn't look back. Bye-bye, Fran. Part 1. It's only when the mug hits the floor that Flo notices it's fallen from her grasp. In the millisecond before it shatters, everything freezes, her hand halfway to her mouth, her eyes on the newspaper, her mind fixated on the image. Everything freezes except the cup free-falling through the air. And then the dog is barking, and milky tea is puddling on the kitchen floor, and her slippers are splattered like a Jackson Pollock. She is too old for shocks, damn it. Shoo, Ernie, shoo. She sticks out a leg and pushes the dog away before he can put his fat pink tongue in the scalding liquid or snaffle up any shards. The cat flap slams. Eric has sensibly fled. Ears back, ginger tail high. Flo sighs. She should clear up the mess straight away, but she doesn't. Instead, she smooths the newspaper on the kitchen table and looks at it again. This thing that made her drop her tea. This thing that near stopped her heart. Later, she thinks, this was put here for me. Of course, it's always put here for her. She has the paper delivered to her door every day, but she doesn't always get around to reading the whole thing. Usually, she catches half a book review or theatre preview upside down or sideways, partly obscured by smears of ink or shavings of lino, and wishes she'd taken the time to read the arts section properly before it ended up as fodder for her studio. But today, the day this particular item is published, she did take the time. She came in from the studio. It's a shed, really, but Flo feels a place she spends so much time in, a place that is responsible for nurturing her creativity over so many years, deserves a grander name than that, to have one of the many cuppers that punctuate her working day. She could have a kettle in the studio. There is electricity and a sink, but keeping it here in the kitchen means she will actually get up and walk along the garden path to the house if she wants some tea, and she considers that small but regular act of movement to be essential. She becomes so easily immersed in the meditative rhythm of carving and printing that she could happily spend all day immobile in her chair in the studio if it weren't for tea in the toilet. So she is thankful that, at her age, she regularly needs both. Now she leans forward over the newspaper and pushes her reading glasses further up her nose. Exclusive, read the prologue of the new novella by best-selling American writer L.P. Henry. It wasn't the author's name that shocked her, since she doesn't recognise it, a pseudonym or a married name perhaps. Neither was it the excerpted prologue itself, although as she read it, the scenario seemed vaguely familiar, the image of a girl loitering outside a school provoking an eerie déjà vu that unnerved her. No, it was the picture of the author, of this L.P. Henry, that sent her tea flying to the floor. She knew, the instant she laid eyes on it and the mug slipped from her hand, that it was Lilli. But now she scrutinises it more carefully. Could it really be her? She looks at the woman's hair, a short crop of vivid white. She looks at the lines framing her cheeks and the plumpness of her body, which used to be so slim. And she knows that despite these differences, it is her old school friend, captured within a physical shell that is not how it used to be, more than half a century after she last saw her, but still unmistakably Lilli. When the front doorbell rings, Flo jumps again, her heart racing at the abrupt interruption. She curses under her breath as she pushes herself up from the table, steps around the puddle of tea and walks down the hall, Ernie trotting after her. Is she expecting someone? She can't think, but when she opens the door and sees the girl on the front step, ah yes, of course. Alice? My goodness, I'd clean forgotten you were coming. She smiles, but the girl's own mouth barely flickers. She holds her hands in front of her, fidgeting with a nail, head down but eyes up, as though hedging her bets, dithering between the two. Sorry if, the girl says, clearly taking Flo's greeting as a rejection. I mean, Mum said you wanted me to come round, but if this isn't a good time, oh. She bends down as Ernie pushes his way around Flo's legs and barks once in a friendly greeting at the newcomer. He's so beautiful. The girl smiles then, properly this time. Flo sees the uncertainty dissolve, transforming her face as though a silent shift has taken place within her and is shining through to the outside. She is fairly tall, with that same litheness of youth Flo supposes she and Lilli had at 18, but her posture is awkward, as though she wishes she were shorter than she is, and her long light brown hair is messy, two things Flo's old school never would have tolerated. She thinks of her and Lilli pin-curling each other's hair in their bedroom in the chateau so long ago, while gossiping about the other students and dreaming of escaping. Yes, escaping together. Flo puts her hand on the door to steady herself as the scene blooms in her head. It's the perfect time, do come in, she says. But she has to force herself to say it, to close the door and usher Alice down the hall, because all the while her head is replaying the prologue she's just read, the sense of déjà vu it provoked, and then it hits her. Lilli's book is about them.
Oh, that is so cool. Okay, we're going to come back now. That's so neat. And the way when it started, when I first read it, I did not understand that the prologue was part of the book. And so I was so confused at first. Wait, who wrote what? It's so fantastic the way you flip that around. You guys are going to love this book. So I would say it's a story about finding courage, facing all these fears. They've all got these fears that have happened in the back. And somehow through writing and reading and digging into stories, finding redemption for all this. So much I want to dig into, but I will start with your inspiration from the novel. I read something that because you are now living in Switzerland, which I am extremely envious of, you wanted to learn about the finishing schools, and I know nothing about them. And I was reading a little bit about what you said about the books, about the silly etiquette rules and all those things. I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I suppose finishing schools were in days gone by were quite typical of Switzerland. I think foreigners in particular saw Switzerland as quite chic and somewhere to learn good manners, and usually the upper classes would often send their young ladies to a finishing school in Switzerland, and the idea was, to make them suitable for marriage and to learn the skills that that they were considered to need back then. And so yes, living here, I was aware that that used to be a thing. And in fact, there were lots of schools in the area where I live in Lausanne. I think one of which still exists in a sort of different format, and several of others that are now have been turned into hotels or different kind of things. But back in the 50s, when my book is set, were very much operational. And I just found that fascinating. I think as a woman in 2022, as we are now, it seems crazy to me that not so long ago those types of schools existed, and that women were taught these things which feel so alien to me, really. And so I just found that fascinating. I thought it'd be a great setting for two characters who are young women who are trying to find their way in life and fighting against the constraints and the conventions that finishing schools dictated.
It was really interesting, and yeah, there were some pretty. I was laughing at sometimes when she would have her own interpretation of what they were supposed to be learning, and she would just Can you just talk about some of the silly rules or the things that the classes they would have to take, which our character is not really that interested in taking?
Yeah, things like flower arranging, and they were taught how to do needlework, how to look after a young baby, the one thing I picked up from, I actually bought a book, an original book from 1958, which was all about etiquette, which really informed some of the scenes in the book. And one thing I found funny is that all the students were taught how to lay a table properly and how to serve food, and they actually had to take it in turns to serve each other, and that was so that in the future they could instruct their servants on how to do it properly. So yeah, it was all about they were potentially going back to quite grand houses, or would one day be looking after quite a grand household with servants and things. So it was all about how to keep house and how to do it properly.
That whole different attitude. When did those start fading out? When did finishing school stop?
I can't tell you exactly, but I think towards 70s, 80s. Yeah, and most of them around here started, yes, fading. So, there was less demand, thankfully.
Yeah, well, that's pretty recent. That surprises me.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about your characters. So Flo and Alice are the two main characters, not in the book that she wrote, but in the reality. And Alice is this sweet neighborhood girl that she just read to us about, and she has social anxiety, which is something that Flo wouldn't really have much knowledge of, because she was so brash, so out there, and so outgoing. I love the way you brought them together. And the way she did it was through art, a form of art with making lino prints. People ask me sometimes what hobbies I have when I'm not writing. And I wondered, because you went into the lino prints and how expressive they could be, the different layers of the art. Do you have hobbies? Have you done these sorts of things before?
Yeah, lino printing is a hobby of mine, which I sort of started fairly recently in the last few years, I suppose. And then during the lockdown and everything, it really became something that I was really getting into and doing more of. And I've always enjoyed anything creative, but I've always enjoyed artistic pursuits. And I think they can really help calm yourself in troubling times. And so I sort of like the idea of writing about a girl who is anxious, and through art she sort of finds her way. Because I think it's something that for me I've just found quite a comfort. When there's stressful times, you can just throw yourself into art and it sort of stills your mind a little.
Yeah, I have to get back into mine. I used to knit a long time ago. That was my big expression, because I can barely draw stick figures, but I did do a lot of knitting, but I haven't recently because it gave me tendonitis. But somebody asked me what my hobbies were, and I was like, I just write. That's all I do is write. But then you run into spots when you hit writer's block and you don't know what to write. So I think I need a new hobby. So when did you decide you wanted to be a writer? You've done everything with editing, journalism, writing, and all these major newspapers, and you've done it all. So when did you know you wanted to be a writer?
I think I always loved writing. As a kid, I'd write silly stories and things. I don't know that I ever sort of made a conscious decision to to write as a career, but after university I was working at an academic publisher in Oxford, and my job was marketing, but I suppose there was writing in that, writing sort of publicity materials and things. And I think it was while I was there that I started pitching freelance features to newspapers. And the first one I got, I think, was for The Guardian, and it was about temping. It was a sort of a humorous thing about temping. And I loved writing it, and I loved the buzz of being published. And it was just something I just thought, I want to do more of this. And so eventually I went back to university and did a year's journalism qualification. And so it just went from there. And I think I always knew in my head that one day I'd want to try writing a novel, but it took me a while to get there. But I'm really glad I did, because I love it.
I'm glad you did too. So when you're writing, what's your process? You had research to do in this, not just creativity. So is it like with me, my research and my creativity go hand in hand? I sort of research as I go. How do you work? How do you put it all together?
I think I start by researching sort of generally. So, for example, here, when I decided I thought I'd like to write about finishing school, I actually went to visit a former finishing school here to talk to the principal. It's now a sort of international mixed gender school, but back in the day, it used to be a finishing school. So she had lots of stories to tell me. So I did things like that, and I read books about the period. Found this online bookstore that sells secondhand books, and I found this etiquette guide and a travel book from the 1950s, which was hilarious as well. So I did sort of general research like that, and then I just write, and I try not to think too much about the research. I just write as much as the first draft as I can, and maybe leave myself notes saying, come back to this or fill this in later, or because I think you sort of have to get the flow of the story. And then when I've done that draft, I'll go back and fill in and perhaps do more specific research on certain topics if I think it needs it. And
do you pretty much stick to your draft?
No, I think I'm not really a planner, so I sort of plan as I go along. I mean, I'm not a complete pantser, but I don't have a sort of whole plan before I start. So it does change a lot. But I also tend to forget, which I think maybe is a good thing, because possibly I wouldn't do it again if I remembered how tricky the process can be. So I've forgotten exactly how much this changed, but I'm sure it did. I think I did about 5 or 6 drafts before I even showed it to anyone, to my agent or anyone. So it changes a lot.
I understand that for sure. And I actually, sometimes I keep my deleted chapters, which there are a lot of, and sometimes I'll even post them on the website. Those are kind of fun. But I should say that we should apologize to our shared editor, Sarah St. Pierre at Simon & Schuster in Canada, because I am completely disorganized, and she's trying to get me organized for the next one, but it's making it even harder. I think the whole pantser thing is kind of freeing, although then you end up writing stuff you don't need to read. Right. But it's, I don't know, it's a creative energy. Do you feel like, I don't know, is it easier for you just to let it go or to stick to that draft, do you think?
No, I find the hardest part is getting the first draft down. I find that really hard because I'm not a planner, I suppose. So just figuring out the story as I go along, I find that really difficult. But then once I've got a draft, I then really relish editing it. I think I could just edit forever. I just love it. And because that's where, for me, it's a bit like any kind of craft, like lino printing or knitting or I think of it as like ceramics. You've got your basic shape, and then you have to work it and change it and tweak it here and there until you've got something you're happy with. And I really enjoy that process. So, and I do find that quite freeing, coming from journalism, where it's, you're much more restricted. Obviously, it's you have a set word count, and it's factual. So it's a different beast. And then coming to novel writing, even though I draw on historical detail, it does feel much more freeing and creative just to be able to write whatever I want.
Yeah, it really does. And I was also reading about you that you're kind of an adventurer anyway. So it makes sense that you would like that, because I'm just going to read this. After moving to Switzerland in 2013, she started to specialize in writing about her new home. As a result, She's ridden a wooden bike sledge in Grindelwald, explored the Absinthe Trail in the Jura, visited a Scottish festival in St. Gallen, hiked hut to hut in Ticino, discovered the story of an infamous counterfeiter in Valais, and attempted fat biking in Gista. That is so cool. Okay, I already said it. You've done it all. I don't need to say it anymore. But obviously, you like to get out there and try new things. And so do you have a plan for the next book now that this one is at bookshelves?
Well, in terms of Canada, so The Lost Chapter was my second book in the UK. So my debut, which is The Other Daughter, is going to come out in Canada next year. Nice. So that will be my second book in Canada, but I'm also writing another one at the moment, so we'll see. Another dual timeline novel.
But they're all standalone, right? They're not sequels, or that's perfect. So
they're all standalone. Yeah.
Read them in any time. Do you know when The Other Daughter is coming out in Canada?
I forget the exact date, but I think it's next summer, so summer 2023. Yeah.
I will be waiting for that one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for coming on here today and for chatting with me. I hope that everybody picks up a copy of The Lost Chapter and that you enjoyed as much as I did, because I really loved the ride of it. It wasn't as far back in history as I'm used to reading, obviously, because I do a lot of World War I, World War II, and that kind of thing. And I loved getting into this with the 30s and the 50s and all the more recent, which, when they start writing about 80s as history, that's when I start to get really upset. Because,
I'm actually doing that in my current work in progress.
Let's not call it history then.
Right.
We'll just call it, back then instead. But thank you very much for coming on here today and speaking to me. It's been a delight meeting you, and I wish you all the luck with this book.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.